Lando Norris sets the pace on the opening day of the Singapore Grand Prix as Lewis Hamilton and Max Verstappen endure frustrating Fridays. However, the big talking point surrounds the FIA and McLaren and its rear wing. From Racing News 365, my name is Nick Golding, and I'm delighted to be joined, as always, by lead editor Ian Parks with a spectacular background. Ian, the action on the circuit today was not exactly thrilling, but we expect this normally in Singapore because the drivers ease themselves into the weekend, but plenty of stories away from the track. And most importantly, regarding the FIA, McLaren, and its rear wing, in particular, the rear wing it ran in Baku, which obviously raised a few eyebrows from a few teams. Weirdly, the rear wing judged as legal, no problems there from the FIA. However, some teams continue to complain. McLaren has now, despite the fact it's legal, offered to make some changes, I hear.
Yeah, hello everybody, and a very warm welcome, warm being the operative word here in Singapore, because we're coming up to 22:11 local time, and it's still about high 20s temperature here, really hot and humid, but that's what we come to expect from Singapore. Obviously, we've got the majestic Singapore Flyer in the background. I did promise my good friend Nick Golding here that I would do a video with the Flyer in the background, and there you have it. Yes, what a story. What a story we've got today. Yeah. From my view here as well, is right across there to the FIA. There, the FIA paddock building. They've been involved heavily over these past couple of days with regard to this McLaren rear wing, the furore of which has slowly built over the course of this week. McLaren pleading innocent, saying, it's legal, it's fine, it's passed all the tests. And yes, it has. It's passed all the load tests. That's exactly what it's supposed to do. However, the complaints have been that this wing flexes under movement. And I'll just give the fans here what is a technical description as to what that wing is actually doing, because we saw it most noticeably in Baku. That 2.2 kilometers straight, that rearward facing camera on Oscar Piastri's McLaren, looking back on that rear wing, and that's where all this has really kicked off. So basically, technically, what that does, it's provided that McLaren, the Muckle 38, with what's been described as a mini DRS. And I'll just explain that a touch more. Basically, the gap between the rear wing's main plane trailing edge and the flap's leading edge expands, and then as the underside of the flap bends upwards, so we're talking about the bit at the bottom there, so the outboard, right on the extremities of that wing, curve upwards. What's that then doing? What's happening there is the gap then between the flap and the main plane increases with speed, so drag is reduced. Now, it's been described as a mini DRS, but it's not actually a DRS. It's not attached to the DRS, shall we say. But what it's producing is it's not working in tandem with the DRS. So what we saw with Oscar, obviously he was out in front, his DRS was not opening. But because when he was in the lead, the outward ends of that plane of the wing were flexing upwards, it was providing almost like a mini slot gap, allowing what has been described as an increase in speed, a very minuscule decrease in lap time, particularly down that, as I say, 2.2 kilometers straight. Now, that wing has been in effect since Spa, but why it becomes so prominent is that the suggestion is that it played a leading role in why Oscar was able to stay ahead of Charles. As I say, this has become quite a grey area of these regulations. Yes, it's legal on one side because it's passing all the load and crash tests, but it's not been deemed illegal. However, McLaren, according to them, offered to make the changes. Now, you can believe that if you want. The FIA has said it asked McLaren to do so. McLaren saying, no, to avoid all this kicking off, to avoid a potential protest somewhere down the line, we're going to do this at the goodness of our heart, and we're going to make these changes. Now, that rear wing, just this another crucial point as well, the rear wing that we saw in Baku is not actually the rear wing that McLaren has on the car for this Singapore Grand Prix weekend. That rear wing in Baku would have made another appearance in Las Vegas simply because of that long straight down there, the strip, of course. So it would have played, again, a role. How significant, we'll let people judge. But nevertheless, they've decided to make these tweaks to stop all this from kicking off any further. As I say, believe it if you want to, folks. That's the word from McLaren when I spoke to them once it had issued a statement saying it was going to make these minor alterations, quote unquote, that it worded in its statement.
Certainly very interesting, and something that you imagine, excuse me, we've got a bit of a flu, so sorry audience, my voice sounds a little bit odd. We're fighting through it, it's all good. But this is a storyline you imagine is just going to continue throughout the weekend, as the likes of Andrea Stella has spoken to, obviously. But let's focus quickly on the circuit, because McLaren were dominating the headlines off the track and also on it, because for the right reasons, Lando Norris topped FP2, the only representative free practice session that takes place in Singapore, because as you can see, it is nighttime. It's similar conditions to what the race and qualifying take place under. Of course, FP1 and FP3 take place in the afternoon. So to put it simply, they're kind of irrelevant in many ways, but Lando looking good so far.
Yes, well, Lando and Charles, because there was barely anything between them at the end of FP2. As you say, they were the more representative conditions. FP2 taking place under the lights of Singapore. And it's, as I say, this is why it's one of my favourites, and it does look spectacular. FP1, there was very little between them again. Charles Leclerc on top of Lando on that particular occasion. However, those conditions not representative. But right now, across the two practice sessions that we've seen so far, and yes, as I say, FP2 far more representative. Those two guys appear head and shoulders above the rest of the field, and it looks like it's going to be a battle for the front row spots as we stand on Friday night between those two guys. Carlos Sainz over half a second back on Lando, and as for Max Verstappen, I know we were going to get onto him, 1.3 seconds adrift. A lot of work to do, said Christian Horner. And boy, that's definitely going to be the case for those Red Bull guys overnight to get that RB20 for both Max and Checo Perez in any kind of fighting order to go into qualifying. We saw it last year, Nick. Those two cars didn't make Q3. Is it going to happen again? As we stand here discussing this on Friday night, there's a very realistic possibility.
And that's what's really interesting is, as you mentioned, actually nothing less than half a tenth of a second splitting Lando and Charles Leclerc in first and second. Carlos Sainz in third was actually 0.6 of a second off Lando. So massive margins all of a sudden from second down to third. But Furore with its new front wing looking pretty competitive. But yeah, we've got to talk about Red Bull, because for Max Verstappen in particular, Sergio Perez did end FP2 in the top 10 in P8. Is another circuit he does quite like. But Max, as you mentioned, they're down in 15th place, 1.3 seconds off. And actually, a bit of a weird day for him, both on the circuit and off it. Because let's start with off it, because something that the FIA are trying to clamp down on is the driver's language in particular. Obviously, using foul language, swearing, whatnot. And it's something that Max obviously swore during the press conference on Thursday, has been given a bit of a slap on the wrist, and effectively community service.
Effectively, yes. So
in simple terms,
I think the FIA, and again I'm going to point to them over there to my left, because that's where they are based in the paddock right now. I think what they've done with Max here is they have used him to set an example. And the reason why I say that, think back to the Las Vegas Grand Prix of last year, the team principal's press conference on the Thursday, bearing in mind it took place on Thursday, not Friday, given the difference in the scheduling over there for that particular Grand Prix. Both Mercedes team principal Toto Wolff and Ferrari counterpart Fred Vasseur used the F words. They were hauled in front of the stewards. They were only given a formal warning. So Max, on the very day that the FIA president, Mohammed Ben Sulayem, had turned around and said that he effectively he was fed up with the drivers swearing. They shouldn't act like rappers. And we'll get on to Lewis Hamilton's comments on that very soon as well following this. He didn't want to hear the F word anymore, basically, or any more swearing over the radio. We've had a couple of examples again, though, to be fair. So Formula One is still playing out these clips of drivers swearing.
Yeah.
It's up to F1. If they want to stop this, don't play the clips, guys. And that's what a lot of the drivers were referencing yesterday in their comments with regard to Mohammed Ben Sulayem's remarks. So Max today hauled in front of the stewards. Natural assumption was formal warning, just like Toto and Fred got last year. No. As you say, Nick, he is going to be serving what is effectively a community service punishment, whereby he's got to do good deeds in favour of some public campaigns going forward. As I say, I think, for me, the FIA has held up Max as an example, basically saying to everybody else, look, we can do this, guys. Don't do it again. Otherwise, this is what you're going to get. Maybe even worse if we continue to get more repetitions of this. I think what's really niggled the FIA is that Max used the F word during the official driver's press conference on Thursday afternoon here in Singapore. There was no need to. He just was basically describing his car, the way it felt going into qualifying ahead of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix, given the changes that have been made to its setup under being between FP3 and qualifying.
Yeah.
And as I say, basically said, this is how my car felt. It was F, basically. And a bit of a silly thing to do. As I say, he didn't really have to do it, but he did it anyway. And then obviously he gave this long answer afterwards when he was asked about the use of swearing. And basically said, look, everybody does it. It takes place all around the world. We grow up with it. What are we here? 5-year-old, 6-year-old? No, we're not. Just get on with it, folks. It's part of everyday life. And apparently he used that kind of explanation again during the FIA stewards briefing. However, the FIA see Max more as a role model compared to obviously Fred and Toto. Quite naturally, you know, he's the leading light. He's a 3-time F1 champion. He's leading these standings again as well. He could become a 4-time champion this season, same as Alain Prost, same as Sebastian Vettel. That's to be seen, of course. Who knows the way this season's going so far. So as I say, for me, yes, they've held up Max as an example. Don't do this again. And you're going to do some good community work with the public going forward. Be a good boy now.
Yeah, and also just to the official wording the FIA used was Verstappen must now do an obligation to accomplish some work of public interest, which is effectively community service. But the thing for Max is that obviously there's a big no-no now using bad language, but based on the Friday he's had and seemingly how unhappy he still is with the car, like I said, down in P15, 1.3 seconds off, you'd imagine you're probably going to hear a few more bad words from him across Saturday and Sunday if the issues with the RB20 continue. Because as you mentioned, there's a really good chance that Max might not be in Q3 unless Red Bull finds something overnight.
Again, Nick, it's going to be a question of will F1 decide to play it out over their broadcast, because they have access to all the audio, remember. So it's up to them. It's down to those guys. And obviously, we know the FIA and F1 have had a bit of a tetchy relationship in the past between Mohammed Ben Sulayem and Stefano Domenicali, you know, the F1 CEO. And, you know, so we're led to believe that that relationship is now on a different level compared to what it used to be. So will Mohammed have a word with Stefano? At the end of the day, another one of Max's arguments for why, the drivers are swearing is, again, a bit different to the FIA press conference. They're under so much pressure whilst they're, behind the wheel of their car, that sometimes it's just a release. Whereas, imagine miking up, and this was part of Max's argument, imagine miking up every single football player during a particular game that's being televised. You're going to hear loads of bad language. So this is just them venting their frustration, their feelings, their whatever it is they may be experiencing at that particular time whilst they're in the car, and they use a swear word to underline that expression, that feeling, as I'll say. So, but as you say, what are we going to hear from Max over the course of this weekend? Well, if F1 decides to play him out and he does decide to swear again, that could be very interesting, because as you say, the performance of that RB20, from what we've seen in the more representative FP2 session, simply is not there. I repeat what Christian Horner said. I overheard him having a conversation with one of the TV crews here in the paddock. We have a lot of work to do. Yes, of course, blindingly obvious comment to make, Christian, but it's not very often that you do hear the Red Bull boss coming out with that kind of comment on a Friday. It does seem to be occurring a little bit more often as this season is starting to go on, and Max's lead is slowly being reduced by both Lando Norris and Charles Leclerc, and even Oscar Piastri to a certain extent after his victory in Azerbaijan last week, of course. However, Oscar definitely off the pace of his teammate Lando after the 2 practice sessions that we've seen so far. So a bit of work for Oscar to do overnight as well, for him to get back onto Lando's level and be in contention for pole position on Saturday.
It's actually a really interesting point about obviously Max saying swearing happens, in all forms of life across the world. Because actually in Singapore on Sky Sports F1 this morning, obviously Ted Kravitz, who's a very experienced pit lane reporter, actually swore because Sky showed the wrong tape. So it just shows it does happen absolutely anywhere. And I think that's a fascinating topic for the podcast on Monday. But Lewis Hamilton as well, obviously a disappointing day on the track, only P11, 1 second off the pace. But more importantly, as you've mentioned, he's not actually too happy with the wording of what the FIA president used when discussing, obviously, swearing amongst the drivers.
Now, Lewis's verdict on that was that because Mohammed Ben Sulayem had referenced in his argument that saying F1 drivers are not like rappers, Lewis thought, well, the majority of rappers are black, so therefore there was a racist element, quote unquote, to Mohammed Ben Sulayem's remarks. That was a pretty incendiary comment that came out on Thursday during all the driver interviews that took place here within the Marina Bay Street Circuit paddock. So might be a bit of an interesting exchange between Lewis and Mohammed should they catch up with one another over the course of this weekend. Pace-wise, just getting to Lewis and Mercedes in particular, a bit of an off day for Lewis. Really not hooked up with that car again. George Russell, right at the end of FP2, hit the wall, completely took off the front wing, managed to get back to the pits at least. 2 minutes to go in that session when he hit the front wall. As I say, at least managed to get back to the pits. FP2 didn't finish under a red flag. But yes, Mercedes not looking too hot around here at this stage. But what could be hotter might be that conversation between Lewis and Mohammed Ben Sulayem, should they catch up with one another, say, over the course of this weekend.
Obviously, McLaren looked good today. Furore looked good. Another team that looked pretty good were RB, and just our final talking point. Yuki Tsunoda in 4th, but more importantly, Daniel Ricciardo in 6th. And there's obviously a lot to talk about him this weekend, and that it could possibly be his last race of the season, potentially his last as an F1 driver, because a lot of rumours that Liam Lawson could be replacing him for the remainder of the season after this weekend. It's typical Daniel, though, to now go and put in a mega Friday.
Yeah, and you've got to feel, Nick, that if he is to have any hope whatsoever of saving his seat going forward for these final 6 Grand Prix, and that's all we're talking about here right now. Let's not even get on to 2025 and whether he might be in that car for next year, because we don't expect that to be the case. We're fully expecting to be Liam Lawson in that RB for 2025. So what are we looking at for this Grand Prix weekend in particular, and these last 6 Grand Prix going forward? It's got to be ahead of Yuki to stand any chance. Ahead of Yuki in qualifying, just to clarify, sorry folks. Ahead of Yuki in qualifying to stand any chance of being in that car for the remaining 6 Grand Prix this season. However, looking at the way Daniel was in speaking to him in the driver pen on Thursday afternoon, you know how Daniel is quite smiley, upbeat, effervescent, even when things haven't been going too well for him this season in that RB. There was none of that. There was none of that yesterday. I would use the expression dead man walking. That for me, and I don't know for definite, but by all accounts and from everything that I'm hearing, it looks like after this weekend, Liam Lawson will be confirmed as the RB driver for the 2 triple headers that we've got left for this season. And this is most definitely, for now, and so we've got to think, there can't be another way back for Daniel going forward, surely, after this, that this is going to be Daniel Ricciardo's last race in Formula 1.
And obviously it would be a loss of a huge personality. But going on to our bold predictions, and actually, I'm just going to go for it straight away. I think Ricciardo he's going to make Q3 and qualify in the top 6. Just got a feeling it would just sum up that whole storyline, and it would give RB a massive choice to make. In terms of pole position, I can't call it. I think it's going to be too close between Leclerc and Norris. For you, Ian, what's your bold prediction for quali?
Given on what we've seen so far, I think most definitely both RBs are going to be in that on Q3. We saw today that, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, I don't know if you've got the times there in front of you, and I should have got to take a quick glance at RB in particular before we came on air. I think Daniel finished 0.010 seconds behind Yuki. Have I got that right?
If you keep talking, I'll keep checking whilst giving your bold prediction.
That's
you
all right.
are spot on.
Spot on.
Yep, spot on.
I think Daniel's going to pull out all the stops on Saturday, and I'm pretty confident he's going to finish ahead of Yuki. And those guys are going to be very close to not being in the top 3, but certainly around that mid top 10 area. And I think both of them are going to out-qualify both Red Bulls.
Oh, bold prediction. I like it. Of course, those who are watching this video, let us know your bold predictions in the comment section below and your thoughts on anything we have discussed. Be sure to subscribe to this channel for 2 reasons. The first of which is we are rapidly approaching 10,000 subscribers. And that's all thanks to you guys and all of you subscribing to keep going. We're almost at 10K. And of course, if you are subscribed to the channel, you'll be included in our latest prize giveaway over at Racing News 365. We are giving away several scale model F1 cars. To enter, subscribe to the channel. It's as simple as that. All that's left to say is from myself and Ian. We will see you on Saturday after qualifying for the next episode of the F1 Update. See you later.
And as always, folks, from the Singapore Grand Prix paddock here, take care.